Hello and welcome to Breaking Embargo. I'm Peter Barnes. That's Alex Phillips. Let's get into it. Yeah, for those who don't know, Alex, she was a Brexit MEP, broadcaster, all-round absolute bastion of liberty, freedom, and the right, and everything that we should be. This is what it is. This is the one we should be following, people, by the way. But I just want to kind of get into your mind about what's next for reform, because obviously they've rode the earthquake, the teal wave, whatever they're calling it, and they've got themselves these 10 councils, mayoralties, they took the parliamentary seat, and what's next? You know, they still, in my head, have a very long way to go to be able to say that they are ready for government. Like, you know, just in any real way, because no party is ever ready for it. Like, no, not really. But Reform are starting way back. Well, so what do you think that Nigel and the team there at Reform can really do to get it ready more than anything?
Yeah, I mean, you are right. They're facing a sort of big sort of learning curve, frankly, because where most other parties, I mean, you could argue the Labour government haven't been, they haven't had a government for 15 years, and yet they'd have been in shadow positions, so sort of learning on the job, so to speak, ready to assume those roles. Although when you look at the quality of the Labour cabinet, I'm not sure whether I care if they're replaced by absolute because they seem to be themselves. But Reform, with only 5 MPs now in Parliament, they haven't, even if they wanted to form a shadow cabinet, they don't have enough. You're right, they've also just won 10 councils and 2 mayoralties, and it's going to be a learning curve for a lot of those men and women as well, who probably have to local governance from a position outside of politics. But again, maybe that's going to be refreshing and revitalizing. I know there are some of those people in councils who have had the positions longer, who have defected, etc. So I think there will be some people who are learned to put the arm of care around the newbies. And, everyone does something for the first time at some point. And I think actually, perhaps at local level, being baked into the sort of status quo and the modus operandi, the way the council's always done things might be what has left so many councils unable to innovate, unable to attack their budgets, and unable, frankly, to deliver quality local services. So perhaps something untried and untested is going to be good. But what Reform's going to need to do is create, I think now, a framework, a sort of structure that sort of has a control mechanism in each and every region to basically help these councillors with things like communications, be there to provide advice when they don't know what they're doing, and to make sure that they deliver on the core pledges that the parties come up. Which is very difficult to do without financing, frankly, because these jobs usually require having paid positions. And despite the polling being incredible for Reform at this moment in time, the donations haven't backed that up yet. Because I think when people part with cash to political parties, it's often because they are pretty certain this is going to be the next party of government. We're still 4 years away from a general election campaign. There's going to be more scrutiny on local authorities than there has ever been.
Well, it's about time. It's about time. Let's be real.
That's a good thing, like you said, because, when you look at how many councils have been put into special measures, how many have massive debts where the debt repayments almost dwarf the amount of expenditure on certain services, there needs to be a shake-up. And Reform has sort of gone out and campaigned heavily on these things. I think one of the main deliverables that Reform has promised is to try and block or at least challenge the creation of migrant hotels or migrants in private rental sector housing. And I was worried, well, how are they going to do this? Where's the money going to come from? Because the last thing stretched council budgets need is to be paying for lengthy and costly judicial reviews. But they do have a KC and a star chamber of barristers all working tirelessly and pro bono for the cause. So that rather answers that one. Whether they're going to in their challenge to the government over the creation of migrant hotels and the like in their areas is yet to be seen. But actually, the way I see this is, even if they're not, they're able to say, we stood up for democracy, we tried to deliver at every level what we promised to do, and they are preventing this. And it points the finger firmly back. So in many respects, I think it's a very adept strategy. Similarly, how are they going Doge local authority budgets? Do they have auditors who are also willing to work pro bono to comb through every single bit of expenditure and start, economizing, so to speak, or making sure that people get more for their money. So there's a lot of untested elements, and the reform councils are going to be scrutinised in a way that no other councils have. But saying that, is that not exactly the sort of conditions which you create brilliant politicians when they are held accountable, where they are tested, where they are put in their comfort zone to do differently? So I think that that there's a lot of structural creation the party's got to do from bottom up now, not top down. But also, if there are by-elections coming up around the country, potentially there's going to be one in North East Somerset because of Dan Norris of the Labour Party and the accusations against him. And I've heard rumour that the Tories in what were once Tory safe seats, who now think they're facing annihilation, might step down well in advance of the next general election, because in doing so, that frees you up to be able to take private sector appointments. The government's package is a lot more than if you happen to lose your seat. So when those come up, Reform's got to populate those positions, if they win those by-elections, with people that they want to now nurture and develop to become a shadow cabinet, if not future ministers.
Yeah, I think that is entirely bang on. I really do. It's interesting with the private sector jobs and appointments, is that's why a lot of them were so angry with Rishi, because there wasn't enough of a gap because of the rules, so for them to actually hop, skip, and a jump into many of the private sector jobs that they were eyeing up later on in the year. A lot of the parliamentary party for the Tories were furious about that. I was like, maybe that was part of the problem about why you weren't winning. You had one foot out of the door. It was a rather silly thing that they were saying, but for me, it seems to be that, I have to admit, this asylum seeker hotel thing is very well thought out. I mean, there just seems to be a plan. There seems to be people. There seems to be some level of kind of this goes there, that brilliant. Everything else seems to be what, Kamala Harris had vibes. I think Nigel Farage and the team seem to have the same thing. A kind of, well, this is where we're going, but just go with us. And the problem now for me is, I don't think the public will do that, because they're no longer a party of protest. They're in power. They're responsible. And I don't think that kind of, we're a young party, we've still got all this to learn. I don't think it's going to wash with the public, particularly with some of the big problems that these councils are facing.
I don't know. Look, I think the proof of the pudding is most people don't even know in the country who their local councillor is and who controls the local authority.
Yeah.
Are very detached from this stuff, and so what we might see now is scrutiny on an unparalleled level. And we know that the Reform Party did really stringent vetting process ahead of these elections, because there are a lot of people complaining about it. But you can see now why they had to do that. And like I said, perhaps when you've got men and women from local areas who've not done politics before, looking at everything with fresh eyes, not baked into the system, not lazily just signing on the dotted line, the way that things have always been done. And also, look, let's be fair. When you've got people who've been councillors for decades and they've their network of trusted trader contracts, their jobs for the boys, their sort of mates rates and all the rest of it, perhaps that also needs shaking up, because I'm sure there's probably lots of corruption, and very sort of low-level petty corruption. At the very least, these sort of like relationships people have that, well, we always give that person a contract, and once a year they send me a case of wine at Christmas. Do you know what I mean? Interesting.
Yeah, definitely.
Do. But the other important thing to remember, of course, is local authorities. 3/4 of local authority money comes from central government, and they're told how they should spend it. So it's not really a huge amount of sort of big nuts and bolts work to do. It's more the paint job at the end. So let's just see. UKIP had councillors, because I used to be head of media. UKIP councillors were very hardworking. They were the sort of people to be cleaning the public toilets, and cutting that way by rolling up their sleeves and getting on and doing things. And I think if Reform can show that they've got a new generation of councillors who go out themselves and fill potholes, just stuff like that, it doesn't require the brains of Britain to be a local councillor. You also don't need any qualifications for the job. So in that regard, anybody should be able to put themselves forward and do that role without people going, well, you've not done it before, maybe you're not going to be very good at it. Let's just embrace what this represents, which is an exciting opportunity for some councils in Britain to do things differently. And fine, we now have a way in which we can see if Reform are able to deliver. And I'm sure the bar's going to be set extremely high when when it comes to
Incredibly high. Incredibly high.
it's
Unfairly high. If I'm being honest, unfairly high, I think it will be.
perhaps, but maybe that is a good thing because we've had fecklessness, laziness, lack of
Yeah.
creativity, overspending on salaries. It's local authorities are
Mm.
sort of drowning in the quagmire of people who potentially think they're in those positions, jobs for life, and have had a rude awakening.
Yeah, definitely. I've always called it the dumpster fire of British politics, is local government. It's incredibly just how badly run it is. Like, you wander into these buildings and there's people running around like headless chickens and doing the work of 9 different people when it's not really should be a person's job in the first place. And nobody seems to, and you hit the key word, accountable. Nobody seems to be accountable at a council because it's interesting, actually. I was on a podcast just the other day and we were talking about how it's always the council's fault. It's like a body, a mysterious, shadowy figure of the council, and it was like, they sound like a Batman villain. But it's very much the kind of, now that we, like you said, we will hopefully start paying more attention because of these high standards, because of reform. And I think that's something they should be given credit for. But I will say that the bar at the bar is going to be so high. But for me, reform are riding a populist wave. They are riding this wave, rightly or wrongly. I don't see there's anything wrong with populism. It's popular. It's what people like. It's what people want. However, they're, for me, always bound by what they're against, not by what they're for. So I think when they get into government, trying to get everybody in the room to agree with each other on what the policy should be is going to be very difficult. I mean, let's just look at the kind of the Tommy Robinson situation, the Shamima Begum situation, this kind of the Nigel Farage, the deportation situation, there's lots of it. And the base, but the online base anyway, goes mental every single time there is any movement. And do you think that you can actually govern with populism? You can protest and you can ride, but can you, stay the course?
Let me break that down to you because, this historic reforms come out of nowhere and this populism spreading across Europe. Reforms the latest to do. It's absolute bunkum because when you look at the fact that Nigel Farage has been in politics the best part of 25 years and kind of invented populism in Europe, okay? He was to do it with UKIP, getting us out of the EU, then the Brexit Party. So first of all, they're not riding a populist wave. They invented populism in the West, quite frankly, even came before Trump. So it's almost sort of like now is the time that this is supposed to happen. It feels like an inevitability. Also, populism is one of these very ill-defined words. For me, what I see this sort of wave of neo-populism as being is the centre-right politics from 10 years ago saying, we're not finished here yet. This is what the public want. What's being proposed is not radical when it comes to controlling borders and cutting government, lowering the tax burden. It's plain and simple Thatcherite politics, small c conservative politics, and once upon a time the politics of the Conservative Party is before this ever central grift that seems to have happened. And so I don't think there's anything radical or untested or new about those propositions. Secondly, let's not attack reform or not having the detail. Because no political party does. We're 4 years away from the general election. Lord knows the Conservatives' policy detail is. The Labour.
Well, yeah, that's true. I was going to say, the thing, just really quick on that, the thing that really gets me is everyone's holding Kemi up to say, where's your policy? Where's your this? And, you've had 10 months. And yet the other political parties are in equal chaos. And Kemi is always singled out for some reason as though she should be miles ahead of everybody else. And I think, if you think about it, Reform are the newbies. So they realistically should be able to get out of the blocks faster than Kemi in a tired old 200-year party. Right. So I don't understand why Kemi is always singled out by the press and by everybody else. Yeah. I genuinely don't.
And the same press, quite frankly, who never asked one policy question of the Labour Party during the snap election, basically got a sweeping majority based on knowing absolutely nothing about what they plan to do in government. Yeah. And did know they've U-turned or broken those promises. And it released a whole new swathe of ideas and policies that if people had been told beforehand, cutting winter fuel allowance, making farmers give up their fields through overtaxation, solar panels, GB energy, some of this more radical extreme left stuff, people would have been like, I'm not voting for that. There's no check on them. And don't even get me started on the Lib Dems who did an entire anti-campaign based upon Takeshi's Castle. It's an
Takeshi's Castle, that's what I said. Yeah,
democracy.
ridiculous. I
Yeah.
was on Kevin's show on Talk, and James Price was on. I know a good friend of ours,
Oh,
and he said, "How has the party of Gladstone turned into Cirque du Soleil? Like, it is ridiculous that this man is doing roly-polies and he's running the Lib Dems, a very realistically powerful political party in terms of its numbers and its presence, and that's what he's doing. It is a disgrace, in my opinion. The man needs to go away."
it's an embarrassment. And if I was him, I would be embarrassed singing all those TikToks, getting on jet skis, tooling around like he's on some sort of, eternal frat week. It is embarrassing. And frankly, it undermines the integrity of our politics. And I think he should be deeply blamed. But the Lib Dems for a long time have gotten away with basically having one policy, which is try and appear nice. It's useless, but they still sort of pick up. They are the protest vote party because no one's ever going to stand for other than being fanatical Remainer rejoiners. But let's see, because what my understanding is Reform now are doing what all big political parties do, which is set up think tanks to start working.
Yes.
Grips of policy making, because it's all very well coming up with mood musical vibes or headlines. You've got that when you get into power, that you've got the apparatus and the levers to deliver it, and when you're scrutinised and challenged. And it's interesting, isn't it? Because you just look at this recent Labour Party white paper on immigration, and you've got the things that you look at the detail and go, okay, they're going to, increase the salary thresholds. Okay, now students can't stay after they finish the degree course, for eternal periods of time. It's 18 months. I don't understand why they're not booted out the minute they've picked up their scrolls. But, but other stuff.
I'll give him an afternoon to take the photographs, and that, would be nice. We get that, then airport. Like, off you go.
White paper, which you're like, well, how? When they said we're going to make it, you're going to make sure people integrate. Okay, how? How are you going to do that? Because the way I would see you need to make people integrate is saying things like we're banning the burqa, we're not allowing in schools, everyone's got to speak English. Are you going to go around door to door and give people little English language tests? I mean, how? Equally, we're going to stop all of these blockages to deportations based on spurious reasons. Okay, we're leaving the ECHR and scrapping the Supreme Court, and also uprooting the Human Rights Act and throwing it in the because I can't see the Labour Party willing to do any of those things. And
unless it's the Supreme Court, ruling that a woman is a woman, then they want to tear it down. But on this stuff, it's very controversial.
Arguably, when it comes to how Reform would deliver on their pledges, who say they will do those things, we actually know a bit more, and we actually have the bones of something that operationally could well deliver. The issues Reform's going to face is the intransigence of the civil service, the obstinance of the quangocracy, the demonisation and legal challenges, because we've become a society of lawfare since Brexit. Let's challenge it in the High Courts, the Supreme Court, etc. But one thing I would say is this, and I was looking the other day at those three Muppets on a train with their mysterious package on their way to meet Zelensky, and I looked at Macron, who's a sort of strange, slippery, relatively competent statesman, but it's more performative than anything else. Merz, who, what the heck does he stand for? Who is he? And here's Starmer, who just looks like the most reluctant prime minister we've ever had, who really just doesn't even have ideology. One minute he's like, immigration is inherently racist. The next minute he's like, this has been a social experiment that's failed. We've got to get tough. We're a nation of strangers.
My favorite one was globalization has ended. Here's free trade deals. Come on, some consistency has to form around that man at some point. The laws of nature tell me that it has to happen, but I don't think I'm going to be alive when it does.
I looked at those Muppets and cast my eyes further afield to some of the other Muppets we've had running countries in the past decades, including our own. And then I look at Nigel Farage, a man who wasn't even elected to the UK Parliament, took on the EU and beat it. The entire EU. He beat it. He took on banking. He wasn't allowed a bank account. And next thing people's heads are literally rolling. And there's a whole debanking scandal papering the front pages of all UK newspapers. So this is a man who has a track record in taking on behemoths and beating them. And when you think statesmen should be like, who you want batting for you, that going out representing your country, who can sit on the other side of Putin's long white table and say, no, absolutely not. Who has that sort of power, that gravitas that he does? I don't think he's seen anybody with that sort of quality since Margaret Thatcher, quite frankly. We've had a load of wets, a whole load of sort of guileless, spineless, directionless, rudderless, nothings, frankly, who occupy positions because they like the idea of the razzmatazz of politics, but don't really have a political bone in their body. And if you get a Farage prime minister, all of a sudden, right, imagine this, how interesting and big the UK is going to be on the international stage again. Because everyone knows that man, they know what he's delivered, they will be fascinated to see how he reacts, in the same way that there's been a flurry of people wanting to cozy up to Trump because he's unpredictable, puts his foot down, makes song and dance and actually will do things. I think Farage, if he gets into number 10, will have a similar sort of gravitational pull. I think world leaders first time will go, hey, this is different. Britain is back. So, I'm happy with getting out of this fog, this malaise, this quagmire. Business as usual, which has led Britain into managed decline, and that for the first time we might be able to have something new with a man who is proven to be able to deliver in big battles. The big question facing Nigel now is, over the next 4 years before that general election, who on earth are going to be the people by his side? Where's the...
Interestingly, I heard an interview with him where he said one of his weaknesses was picking people. And I thought, that's a very bold thing for a man who wants to be prime minister, who's one of his main jobs is picking people. But I kind of feel it was quite smart as a way to get that out there, saying like, look, I'm aware of my history of things collapsing around me. I thought that was a very smart tactic, actually, to kind of edge that off and say like, look, I'm aware of it. But yeah, you're bang on there, because the problem I think Reform have is they want individual thinkers, they want doers. The problem is those people don't tend to work in teams very well, and I think whoever ends up being the full-time chief whip, good luck. But honestly, good luck, because I think that might be pretty difficult, actually.
I think as long as they have somebody who is loyal but creative, a very good economist to be chancellor, as long as they have a strong prime minister, and everybody else is extremely competent but loyal to the project, what we can't have is any more characters or cards who think they're above the team and think that they're special somehow and know best, because politics can't work like that. But at the same time, when you look at the bar, the threshold to beat set by the Labour cabinet, well, come on. I mean,
I mean, that was also one of Nigel's answers about, what are your policies for local councils? Don't be Labour. Like, he was like, don't be the other guy. And for once, it actually works. But for me, I think the thing that Reform... Sorry, Alex. I was just going to say, for me, the thing that Reform need is they need a big mandate. They need a very clear signal from the public that we want change, and that is the change that we want. And my big problem with the locals was I don't think it really delivered that. Not yet. It's going in the right direction, but I don't think it's anywhere near it needs to be, because it's not broke in to remain a territory. We don't know how well they're going to fare in those areas.
You know why? Because most of the councils didn't put themselves up to election. Labour have not been tested by Reform. And this is what's interesting. So Labour-led authorities decided to take Angela Rayner's options of not having a plebiscite. And so we don't know how Reform can take on and beat Labour, when actually, technically, those are exactly the areas where I expect Reform to flourish, not in the Tory-held shires, which will go Lib Dem, but the red wall areas. We've seen what happened with Durham Council. And actually, when we've had polling done by YouGov subsequent to those local elections, what we've seen is Reform's on about 30%, Labour on 21%, and the Conservatives languishing below 20%. So it's a massive, almost 10-point lead, which, if that were translated into a general election, would be a whopping majority. And
now, it would be. However, you then have the problem of turnout. If you look at the locals, it was one of the lowest levels ever. And we both of us have said Keir Starmer doesn't really have the mandate because not a lot of people voted for him. The same accusation could be very easily thrown in Nigel's direction if the general election turnout is as low as Keir's, or if not lower. He has a real problem here about he's got to get the people out to the polling station. So no matter who they vote for, he's got to get them out.
Yeah, I agree with that. But interestingly, what I would say is people didn't want to vote for Labour, didn't want to vote for the Conservatives. People are voting for reform. It's because they want to. When you vote for change, you're more
That's
likely
true.
to
Yeah.
vote it rather than go, oh, am I going to vote the same way as I always do? So I don't think turnout will necessarily be a problem. What I do worry about, and I really sincerely mean this, if and any sensible person looking at what's happened across the West would be concerned about this if they are a reformist, is look at all the lawfare they threw at Trump. I don't know who they talk about this, but they stopped at nothing to try and prevent there being a second Trump administration. In France, we've seen the accusations leveled against Marine Le Pen and the judicial fight to stop her from standing for election. In the AFD, they've come out with spurious, in this instance, the German it's a spurious claim that the AFD is far right and therefore must be blocked from running. We've seen what's happened in Romania, where Georgescu was stopped and then his successor has now gone on to win the populist vote again. We saw the attacks levelled against Giorgia Meloni, who thankfully did get through and has turned out to be a pretty solid leader. But, you know, the powers that be, the globalist elites, really do not want. I mean, if you think that the idea of Marine Le Pen is a nightmare to them, or, you know, this Lidl, or
builders, yeah.
There or not, Nigel Farage is even more so, because we're talking Britain, which is a big economy in Europe, which has the voice of the Republican administration in America, which has always had a tendency to be the vanguard politically and geopolitically on the world stage. Nigel Farage-led Britain would be a real fracturing, if not obliteration, of the old. They're not going to want that to happen. And so my wonder is, what are they going to do? Because if they throw scandals against Nigel Farage, I'm not sure much is going to stick unless it's truly heinous. You know, Boris Johnson's had affairs and this, that. People don't care anymore about this sort of titillations and the peccadillos. We go down the route of saying, oh, look, we've got examples of reform councillors who have said racist things. Well, I mean, look, reform have gone through the most stringent vetting process. So anything they do find, let's see what it is. But you've literally got a Labour MP accused of being a nonce right now.
Yeah.
It's like, I don't think that's going to work either. So I'm going to try and go down the route of some sort of lawfare to try and discredit reform and make sure that it can't be part of the ballot. Well, lawfare has been used so much now, that card has been overplayed, the public aren't going to swallow it. So I really do wonder, because they will be sitting there plotting within their corridors and their ivory towers, and this will be both at party level, like the Conservative Party and Labour Party, but it will be big business, the EU, etc. They'll all want to do anything they can to stop Nigel getting into number 10. So my big concern is, what are they going to do? To what lengths are they going to? Because they're going to have to go to some pretty desperate measures if they looks like the current momentum.
Oh, I couldn't agree more, because I think the one thing that they never realized is that, particularly the Democrats in America, they became the villains of their own story. You know, they became Frankenstein. They became Dr. Frankenstein, not the monster. And, you know, it was always interesting to me that didn't matter to them. It was just take Trump down at all costs. It was like the kind of like laser focus, and like the election be damned. Like, they're not bothered. They just wanted Trump, and it became personal. And I get the feeling the same might happen with Nigel. Obviously, he doesn't have many friends in the European Union. Let's be real. But you know, the European Union is in a very dangerous place right now because it's losing power. And I've always said it's like a wounded animal in a corner. It's never going to be more vicious than it is right now.
Well, exactly. But you say he doesn't have many friends in the European Union, maybe not in the European Commission. But if you look around and look at some of those world leaders, if we do see in the French presidential elections Marine Le Pen able to run, or if she's not Jordan Bardella running and winning, if you look at Giorgia Meloni, if you look at Viktor Orban, if you look at Geert Wilders, I think you'll find that Nigel Farage has got a great friends lying dormant, waiting for him to come to create a sort of super pact of a proper central right in old currency, right of centre political parties in Europe who can wrest back control from some of these entities who have overseen essentially cultural vandalism on a mass scale across Europe with their open borders projects and economic decline with their protectionism. So I actually think what you will find is Nigel Farage has a lot of people sitting there waiting, saying that he's the person who gets into number 10. It's going to be, we are living through really unprecedented times, Barnsley.
Yeah. It's exhausting. It's utterly exhausting.
We've not had a party Labour
No.
Conservatives for 100 years. This is a once in a
Mm.
lifetime event. And I think that people in the country know that. So when it comes to figuring out, when it comes to not being deterred from doing what they want to see happen, which is to be part of a revolution, I think it's going to be hard to quell this momentum.
Yeah, I agree. But the one that I would say to give the reforms of advice, expectation management is now key. You know, you've got to keep the level head. You can't run around. You've got to stay on message. You've got to be the professional party that they're all claiming to be. This is make or break. You're right now, because I think if reform don't do it, no party's ever going to do it. I think this is a kind of, you know, like the last charge of the Alamo kind of situation. And I think I have a feeling if they get their act together, they could do it. However, the problem I have is getting 12 right-wing people in a room to agree on something is very difficult. You know, it's always one of the reasons why I think the right is so terrible in this country, is because one, we can't get along with each other, and two, most of us all want to be the leader because we're naturally quite competitive people. And I think that is going to be the real test, is the party management and holding it together without seeming like you're the one overbearing it. And to get that balance is going to be hard.
I think you're right. And I think when Nigel said the words, you know, I'm very bad at picking people, we know what he was alluding to, and he was alluding to Rupert Lowe. Now, Rupert is a very talented man, a very passionate politician, but he didn't play collegially. And I'm not exonerating the party from their reaction or condoning how they dealt with this. But Rupert Lowe had decided long before things erupted publicly that he was going to be a maverick, that he knew best, and he was going to do his own thing, which doesn't work. So this is sometimes a problem. It's probably why parties like the Conservative Party have this onerous system of saying you've got to be a councillor first, then you've got to stand, you know, 3 times in a seat you're never win. Then if you prove yourself, we might put you in a winnable seat. And then if we really like you, you're being a safe seat. It's this conditioning of we're your master, you jump when we jump, or you don't get any. Now, Nigel has never done that. He's always been on a meritocracy, which is then loosely based on the concept of gratitude and loyalty, which some people just don't have it within them to show, particularly if they're alphas, let's say. So this is where Nigel, I mean, I don't want to have many pianoforte legs, to quote Dickens in Hard Times. I don't want these carbon copy process politicians who don't believe, just sort of tug their forelock to the party in order to get somewhere. I want to see a sort of this plethora of capable people representing all walks of life. And I think that's Nigel's ambition. But at the same time, you need people who are going to be loyal, take one for the team, because, you know, manifesto written by any party, not even the leader is going to like all the policies. Do you know what I mean? No one.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
You can get a Venn diagram of agreement, but no one's going to agree on everything. So you win some, you lose some. You fight your corner for the portfolio that you manage, or the thing that matters to your local constituency. But otherwise, you realise there's got to be cohesion. This is where Nigel, I think, now has to use things like any by-elections that come up to pick those candidates very sensitive. They need to be capable people, but those people will end up being the frontline fighting force going into the next general election. And you never think the people who end up in cabinet. But I think the other thing, which is often spoken about and won't come to pass, I don't think, much or in any significant way before an election, is any sort of deals to be done with the Conservatives. Because
this was going to be my next question. Yeah,
even he is not so pig-headed as to realise that having a little bit of grey hair in the cabinet, or whatever that might be, in terms of people who know the way around Whitehall, is going to be invaluable. So it's whether they want to take Tory scalps ahead of the election and start getting those place before a general, and how that plays out in terms of the optics, or whether this is a case of doing deals during the election where they'll make sure that certain people retain seats and then will be given cabinet positions, or whether there might be a deal to be done after the election, depending how the results are sliced or diced, which would then include certain Conservative ministers in Conservative MPs in ministerial positions. And the reason I think this is likely to happen, is because Nigel has watched what's gone on around Europe. He was always really good friends with a guy called Timo Soini of the Finns party, who, when Timo won the Finnish elections, quite by surprise, and they were like reform, they'd been in government before, he said, I'm not going to accept the role of being the Prime Minister or President, or whatever it is in Finland. I'm going to let the legacy party do that job, but my people are going to be in this cabinet and you're going to dance to my tune. Now, here to builders, less through choice, more through mechanics. There's also similar position. The PVV won the elections, or got the largest vote share in the Holland elections, the Netherlands elections, but he's not sitting there as the prime minister. He's not the one leading the government, but his people are in the key positions when it comes to policy making. Nigel will have seen how this has been exercised. He would have also seen Trump 1.0 and the administration there, and what Trump 2.0 is doing. And if there's something you have to say about Nigel, he is a scholar and a student of these things. He watches
very much. Yeah.
So I think he will be thinking probably, and I don't want to make assumptions or people read this as me knowing and that's what's going to happen. But I think he will probably be quite alive to the prospect of potentially having a couple of Tory scalps in senior positions. North East Somerset is an interesting seat if that comes up. Mogg's old constituency. If Mogg goes over to Reform, he would win that seat with a 20,000 majority. If he doesn't and wants to stand with the Conservatives and Reform stand against him, no one will win. So it'll be interesting to see what characters such as the Moggs of this might wish to do.
Yeah.
But also,
yeah, I have an interesting. Sorry, on the Mogg election, if it happens, I have a very interesting theory that if Reform don't stand, because then you could prove that the Reform votes. You have a narrative then that you could actually wield. They very powerfully say, like, look, you only won because we didn't run. That would terrify CCHQ to its absolute core. Now, whether it would be worth it, but early on, I think it would be worth it. Towards the end, I'd be tempted not to do it of this Parliament. But if it was like, say, later this year, I'd be tempted just to say, do you know what? No, we're not going to run it. We're going to reserve our resources and we're going to focus on something else. We've got these councils running. Look, we're focused on delivering. That you could spin this a very nice way. And then you could still say, look, you only won because we didn't run.
Yeah, no Reform will stand. There's no chance whatsoever.
Yeah.
Sort of capitulated in 2019 and stood down party candidates for the Conservative Party. That has gone down in his mind as the greatest betrayal ever, where Boris Johnson didn't give anything in return, bit off the hand that fed him with absolutely no thanks. So that's definitely not going to happen. Look, I've been speaking to about that North East Somerset seat. I happen to be a West Country girl, so maybe I'm, sure who might be the candidate. So I know what the party's thinking is. There's not going to be any gifts to the Conservative Party, even for hard proven that you actually do need us, because the Conservatives know this. Parties do immense amounts of polling. They can look at vote share, they can work it out. But there will be a leverage put against certain people in certain constituencies, which will be, okay, we might give you a free pass. You can then be in cabinet, but you've got to be, in agreement with the Reform agenda. I think there probably will be deals to be made, but that's not going to be a conversation that happens this early in proceedings, because looking at the polling, Reform don't need to be doing this right now.
Yeah, but the conversation is kind of moot because we're nowhere near that situation. And like you said, they're in pole position. They don't need to do it. And actually, it's good not to do it because it shows you believe in yourself, that you've actually got that self-confidence, which I think none of the political parties actually have at the moment outside of Reform. They're either still licking their wounds, or they're terrified to do anything, or they're not serious people. I think Reform have that great advantage now of being the new thing as everything crumbles. You could be the shiny new thing around the dumpster fire that is Parliament. And I think that could be a very good messaging moment to say, we're here to build. My big criticism of Reform at the beginning was it just looked like he wanted to blow things up. There was a lack of building. And I think if they could get that together, I do think they'll be an unstoppable force.
But I think there is that happening. And these things take time. This election caught everybody off guard. You were just mentioning.
Yes, it did, yeah.
Conservative MPs. So Reform especially, which is just a logo and two guys having occasional Zoom meetings, was especially caught off guard. So you've got to remember, Reform is a year old. But I think they're setting up policy. They have a policy unit, and I believe they're setting up think tanks and things like this to go through the motions and do things properly. And they should be looking at cooperation with some established think tanks, be it the IEA, potentially Policy Exchange, although they're very, very conservative, as in not small c conservative, but party. So let's just see now how things progress. 4 years is not a long time, but it's long enough to sort of start working on things like a manifesto and policy delivery. The thing that is going to be difficult to do ahead of that election is to get a shadow cabinet, because that means you're going to need at least, like you said, 7 people elected to Reform very quickly, and that's all going to be dependent on by-elections. And are we going to even have 7 over the course of this Parliament? Who knows? But you talk about reform being new. Yes, reform is new. The logo's new, the name's new.
Yeah.
Faces and characters are new. But actually, Nigel Farage is probably one of the longest serving.
Oh my God, he's been around. It's actually staggering how long Nigel has been around the political establishment in some form or another. Like, you know, I think he's actually, to be fair, never given enough credit for that. We know what it's like, really, that kind of the cutthroat nature of that world, and to survive it, but also to thrive in it, is unique. It is. I have my issues with Nigel, but I will never take away his operator skills, his ability to be not be a politician, but be knowing how the game is played, but play it better than everybody else.
Exactly. And it's funny, isn't it? The media never give lip service to that. Whereas the Lib Dems, everyone went, oh, Min Campbell, Vince Cable, aren't they brilliant? I'm like, they've never been in government before.
Yeah.
They've never been chancellor.
Winning a safe seat multiple times is not a skill.
Yeah. They were lauded as being these sort of wizened old, veterans with loads of knowledge and know-how. Nigel's probably the most proven, wizened knowledge and know-how veteran that there is in the whole of UK politics, who equally has the force of personality to stand up to other world leaders, stand shoulder to shoulder with them, not be pushed around, but actually command some respect. And at the end of the day, that is what a prime minister is all about. When it comes to cabinet, a lot of that seems to be choreographing Whitehall, letting them choreograph you. That's going to be the more interesting thing, which is where they're going to need some people with insight into those mechanisms. But I think they're probably going to have a bit of a drastic melee style, thrash and burn stuff. And I think it's the only way to sort of really shake up politics. How that looks, I don't know.
Yeah, that's the thing. At the moment, we really just don't know. But I do think there's a big challenge ahead. I, as a political nerd, I'm having the best time of my life. I think this is absolutely one of the best moments to be involved in politics in any level. And, I always say to people, now is the time to be interested, because it is interesting. Like, there is so much happening, not just in the UK, but around the world. And I think, Alex, I love us working together, because we have these conversations where, we can come at things and disagree with each other, but then somehow we then agree with each other, and then we go back to disagree with each other. And that's what it should be. And I just want to say a big thank you for coming on and sharing those amazing insights. This has been a weird role reversal, so we'll go back to normal next time. But again, that's Alex Phillips. Thank you so much for watching. Please don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, and I'll catch you next time.